I think it's very exciting with deepfakes, especially when you talk about voice. Imagine a world where you could call someone and then steal their voice pattern in a couple of seconds and then be able to mimic them instantaneously. So you call me, you steal my voice pattern, then you call my mom and you sound like me. And you can have a conversation with her. This comes back to who is real and who is fake. How do we authenticate who's on the other side of the phone in a world where we cannot trust that voice patterns are genuine because they might be deep fakes? And if we can do them on a large scale, industrial-wise, that raises the issue even further. So I'm going to talk about real and fake accounts on social media, but I think this issue is not going to get easier, it's going to get harder, and it comes back to authentication. Today it's very easy to get a fake account on social media because it depends upon two things: email address and password. But we also don't have good ways to authenticate voice, video, and other things. So I'm going to talk about this experiment, which we published just a few hours ago. It's called Falling Behind: How Social Media Companies Are Failing to Combat Inauthentic Behavior Online. This is an experiment that we've lived for almost a year now. I'm going to give you a little bit of a background story before I go there. So we studied social media manipulation in many different forms. I started looking at the black market for social media manipulation about a year ago, where we looked at the industries, the complexities of how that worked, because I thought in the beginning that this is something you'd find using a Tor browser in the deep underbelly of the internet. You'd find this guy in a cloaked hat, and you'd be like, "Give me your likes." And he would provide you 100 likes. And then I realized, ooh, these companies buy ads on Google. And we know how easy and widespread this is because we have a study where we measured this in the Baltics in relation to conversations about NATO and the Baltics and Poland called Robotrolling, which we publish quarterly. The latest publication just came out as well, and you'll find it online. Based on all of this, we decided to do an experiment to test social media companies' ability to combat inauthentic coordinated activity. So what is this thing? What is this market for buying social media manipulation? If you Google it on your phones now, buy YouTube views, you're going to find maybe ads, a little bit depends on where you are, but you will find many sellers that provide shops where you can buy online engagement. This is a video by CNET on a vending machine where you can buy engagement using cash. Still haven't been able to try that, which is a bit sad. And about a year ago, we were in the US Congress, and we made a small experiment to see, well, how does this work in reality if we try to use these things? So we took Senator Chuck Grassley. He had made a post over Christmas about his vacuum cleaner. It had 1,000 likes. I wrote some of my own comments in a simple notepad form. And then I bought engagements. I bought the comments. You can actually see the comments I wrote. They're also uploaded by bots. And some of these likes. And I bought them from a Russian service provider. They look like this. You go to their website, you click what you want, and you get it delivered. In that specific case, I bought 2,000 likes, 2,000 views, and 80 custom comments, and I paid about $20. And we realized, ooh, this is efficient. We could probably use this as a tool to evaluate the social media company's ability to counter inauthentic coordinated behavior on their platforms. Before I go into that, I'm going to give you 4 insights about this industry. What is it? First of all, it's the scale of the industry. It's much more complex than we thought. Yes, social media website, software that runs it, subcontractors that provide bots. They're a little bit like wine merchants. You get a cheap account, you age it, you mature it, you keep it in a basement, you let it out from time to time, and it gets more expensive over time. And then you sell these things to social media, to social manipulation services. But you also depend upon other subcontractors, such as reCAPTCHA services and so on. So imagine a complex industry with lots of subcontractors. But it's also an industry that's open. Google it, you will find. They will also buy ads. They run YouTube tutorials. So manipulating YouTube, they also run videos on YouTube to teach you how to manipulate YouTube. And they advertise, buying ads on the major search engines, such as Google and Bing. And much of this infrastructure is Russian. And it's important to know because they're actually very good at this. They're very nice companies. They're very customer friendly. And I say, if you want to know the state of social media manipulation, you buy 10 likes at one point, and they will send you promotional updates like, oh, Black Friday sale that just happened. They offered 30% discounts on likes. But they will also tell you when things aren't working. So, oh, this week Instagram updated their services, and we can't manipulate them, but we're working on a fix. And then a couple of days later, we found a fix. Services have resumed. So if you ever want like situational awareness, buy 10 likes and they'll send you those updates. So this story then is about assessing the availability of the social media companies in relation to the manipulation service providers. And this comes from the European Action Plan on Disinformation, where they partnered with social media companies and they signed up on something called a Code of Practice, where the signatories committed to intensify and demonstrate the effectiveness of efforts to close fake accounts. And they called upon researchers to assess this. Look at this. Challenge accepted, we thought. So 6 months ago, they published the first interim report, and they said, we've done quite well. Facebook, for an example, disabled 2.19 billion inauthentic accounts in the first quarter of 2019. So they disabled a lot of inauthentic accounts. Now, we wanted a study to assess the ability of them to combat this behavior overall, not just close accounts. So we did this in 6 weeks, in May and June of 2019. We bought engagement, fake engagement, from manipulation service providers on 105 different posts. So these were posts we created ourselves on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, and then we bought manipulation on these posts. And we used 11 Russian, 1 Polish, 2 German, 1 French, and 1 Italian social media manipulation service provider. We paid about 300 euros, not 300,000 euros, 300 euros, and we got 54,000 engagements. 3,500 comments, 25,000 likes, 20,000 views, and 5,000 followers. And then comes the experiment. Then we measured. Then we scraped these accounts to see how much of this engagement got through. After you buy 10 likes, do you get 10 likes? How long does it stay up? If you look at 30-minute intervals, at what stage does the social media company start to remove it? What happens after 1 week? What happens after 3 weeks? What happens after 6 weeks? And then we reported a selection of it. So we clicked report, inauthentic account, and then we waited to see what happened. So what happened? 4 weeks after our purchases, 4 out of 5 of the bought inauthentic activities were still online. 3 weeks after reporting a random selection of the inauthentic accounts that we identified. So you buy 10 comments, they get delivered by accounts. You know who these accounts are. You report these accounts to social media companies and say, this is an inauthentic account. You know because you bought it. And then you wait and see what happens. Do they remove it now that we've reported an account which is 100% an inauthentic account? Turns out that only 4.5% of those accounts that we removed were actually that we reported were actually removed. But there was a big difference actually between the social media companies, and this was one of the insights that we got from this study, that they weren't all equally bad at this. In fact, there was quite a big difference, both in terms of the kind of content they're able to counter manipulation on, but also between the platforms. Take views, for an example. So you buy views on a video and to inflate the statistics of how many people have seen a video. On YouTube, they would remove, on average, 10% of those views, which means you buy 1,000 views, you only end up with 900. On Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, you buy views, you get all the views. But for an example, with followers, YouTube, for an example, did a pretty good job. They removed as much as 61% on average of all the followers. Comments, all of them didn't do very well. It was quite low rates. But you can see that there's a difference between the platforms. And that we didn't know. We did not know that to what extent there was a difference between these different social media platforms. So we published the charts where we looked at different criteria. It's a bit difficult for you to see, I realize, but I'll read it out some of the things to you. So we looked at these 7 different criteria where we assessed the ability of platforms to counter inauthentic coordinated activity, such as the ability to block fake account creation. And that was us. We tried to create fake accounts on these platforms, and then we assessed how easy is it to create a fake account. Some of these platforms were doing a better job. For an example, on Twitter, it was quite hard to create a fake account. They were very good at shutting down our fake accounts. But we also realized that with a little bit of technical know-how, you can still create fake accounts. But you need to have some skills. You need to know how to use a VPN. You need to know how to control your cache status. You need to know how to modify your cookies and so on. Do we assume that the social media manipulation industry knows this? Probably. And then we looked at the ability to identify and remove the inauthentic accounts. How many of the accounts were active during this entire period? Some of them were better or worse. Twitter were still the best at this one. We looked at the ability to remove likes, views, and comments. YouTube performed the best in that comparison. We looked at the ability to undo historic activity. So if you buy one like, and that account that delivered that like is removed, in an ideal world, the like is also removed, right? So if you remove an inauthentic account, the effects they've had on the social media platforms also gets removed. Turns out, on some platforms, this does not happen. So even though accounts get blocked, likes still stay up, probably because of a programming glitch that nobody thought that, maybe our counter should be in relation to the amount of active accounts that we have. So especially Instagram had a problem with this when we looked at this. Manipulation costs. One could assume that if it costs more to manipulate a platform, that's a testament to either how popular it is to buy this service or how difficult it is to get these things delivered. So Instagram, very easy to manipulate, but it's also the cheapest platform to manipulate. While on YouTube, it's the most expensive platform to manipulate over average. Then speed of delivery is something. Online conversations happen in a very rapid pace. If you buy engagement and it gets delivered after 4 weeks, that engagement is not worth as much as if that manipulation gets delivered within 5 minutes. And that differs quite a bit between the different platforms. Especially Twitter is a bit slow to manipulate with the social media manipulation service providers that we tested. So Twitter did a good job there, Instagram very quick. Our record was actually 5 minutes after we pressed the button, we had the fake engagement on our Instagram accounts. That's not good enough. And then, of course, speed of account removal after being reported. Overall, I showed you they did a pretty bad job, but some were far worse. For an example, YouTube, they removed 0% of the accounts that we reported. So based on this, we did a relative performance of the accounts, where we assessed that Twitter is number 1, YouTube is number 2, Facebook is number 3, and Instagram is number 4. But as you can see from this illustration, the manipulation service providers are still winning this race. And that leaves us to the general conclusion that Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube are still failing to sufficiently combat inauthentic behavior on their platforms. And it's simply based on the fact that if you buy engagement, that engagement gets delivered, and that cannot be good enough. We did a case study within this as well, where we asked, okay, so we set up fake accounts and we bought activity on these fake accounts. That tells one part of the story, right? But could it be so that official verified accounts, with the blue check mark on, that they are actually better protected than the average account, that there is a difference here that we are not seeing? So we decided to buy engagement on some European commissioners' social media posts, where we took, for an example, their Christmas greetings. So we have very strict requirements. A political post, they had to be at least 1 year old, so that they were aged, so that we didn't recommend anything, and we talked to the commissioners, of course. And we tried to see, well, is there a difference? And our conclusion is no. Although we got some different data from manipulating or buying engagement on these official verified accounts, we still managed to manipulate them as easily. The stats weren't the same, but the overall conclusion is still that No, it is not more difficult to buy manipulation on a verified account than it is on an ordinary account. European Commissioner's blue checkboxed account is not better protected than any other account online. Some policy recommendations out of this, and I've mentioned some before. One I think is important, and that is to set standards and require reporting based on more meaningful criteria. With standards, I mean, for an example, what is an inauthentic account? Social media companies don't have the same definition. So you cannot actually compare between the platforms. If Instagram removes one account and Facebook removes one account, that is not the same. They define these in different ways, so we cannot accurately compare. We also need reporting based on more meaningful criteria. I would say that amount of accounts blocked, yes, it tells you a little bit about the problem space, but it doesn't say anything about the amount of manipulation on the platform. I wanted an illustration which I thought was very funny, and it would be a bank director, and he would sit and he would say, "So, how many robberies have you thwarted?" He said, 10 robberies we thwarted. Great, can I see the money? No, number 11 stole it. So we need more meaningful criteria, i.e. looking at, well, what is the manipulation that actually comes through on these platforms? And to get that, we need to increase transparency on the platforms, to be able to do these sort of experiments, but also to get them to do these sort of experiments and tell us these stories. We did it from the outside perspective, overcoming many technical hurdles, but they could do these sort of studies themselves and tell us more about the online environment which they see. If that doesn't happen, we need to establish more independent and well-resourced oversight. Especially well-resourced, I think, is important, because you need technical know-how, you need people to do the work, and you need people who understand in depth what they are seeing. And that's not so easy. That is a capability we need to build. Then we come to the market for social media manipulation. And I think if I'm going to talk about one thing in the future, it's probably this market that we need to consider to regulate it. Should we allow that there is a manipulation industry where you can so easily buy this sort of engagement? Many of these are European companies, widely available, because it's not illegal in any way. Well, if we're saying that banks or social media companies need to do more to protect their money accounts, we should probably also talk about the role of the bank robbers or the manipulation service industry. Should that be allowed? Do we need to put safeguards? Do we need to get the police to look into that? Or should we allow it and then be aware of the consequences at least? It needs to be a conscious decision. Social media platforms need to do more to counter abuse of their services. So they have done more, and we talk about that in the report, so we do give them cred. But some things I have a hard time understanding, like why is it so that you can find tutorials on YouTube on how to manipulate YouTube? Why do they allow ads to market these services? Why is the best place to find a manipulation service provider for Instagram on Instagram? How difficult could it really be to weed these things out? So I think that is an aspect which we have not looked enough on, and they should do more to work on that. And we also need this whole of industry solution. It ties back to the Philippine report that it's not just manipulation service provider and social media platform, ad agencies, political groups, all of it come together. To solve it, we need to look at all these aspects. And then finally, this has some implications for NATO as well. The main takeaway is, of course, that the defenses of the social media companies are still not adequate. They're inadequate, which means that we need to expect that antagonists will be able to exploit social media for malign purposes in case of a conflict or during everyday use. It's possible. Malign actors can do it, and they might do it. So we need to recognize this. This has not changed during the last year. And for that reason, of course, we need to refine our strategy to communicate in a very highly contested information environment where this happens. But it also means that as nations, partners, and the alliance develop their ability to do information environment assessment, we also need to put more emphasis on being able to differentiate, from our perspective, what is real and fake engagements online, so that we, when we try to map out who's targeting us, can differentiate between these two. So that's something to take away. That's a very long study. The study is available online. Do read it. If you have any questions afterwards, don't hesitate to come up and ask. Thank you.